Hi, Christine.
Hello, Anita, and thank you for inviting me to talk today. I've got a series of slides. I know I've spoken to some of your group before, so it was a number of years ago now, I think, but just a recap and a refresh on the scheme and some data on the reporting that's coming about SJS and 10. So the yellow card scheme and the reporting of side effects or adverse drug reactions to medicines. And next slide, please, Nathan. So just really to let you know, I suppose, what is a drug side effect? Well, it's any reaction that appears after you've taken one or more drugs, which might include herbal or homeopathic medicines, and also when you suspect the reaction has been caused by the drug. So it's as simple as that, really. Next slide, please. And I'd just like to read you out this. Now, this was a quote from a GP who's also a medical journalist, and he says, "Show me a drug with no side effects, and I'll show you a drug with no benefits. When you take a medicine, you're entering into a bargain. The prescriber, to the best of their knowledge, will give you a medicine that will do you more good than harm, but you have to accept that the risk that it may do you more harm than good. So for some medicines, we understand the risks and we can mitigate them. But for others, the knowledge is just not there yet. So this is really where the yellow card scheme comes in, to try and help us create more knowledge about when medicines cause harm." Next slide, please. Now, most of us at some point in our lives will take a medicine, and sometimes we just don't know what's going to happen next for us. And many of you, I know, have had really severe reactions to medicines that could not have been predicted. But if you are worried about the symptoms that you might be experiencing, then please always do check the leaflet that's inside the pack, which you will always get with your medicine. And if you're worried, then please do always speak to your doctor or the pharmacist about your worries, and they will be able to help you take it from there. Next slide, please. So I'm talking about the yellow card scheme. So just a little bit of background about that. So the scheme was introduced in 1964, and that was following the thalidomide tragedy of the late 50s and early 60s. And the picture there you can see is the advert that you would have seen in the medical press at that time. And you can see it says, "This child's life may depend on the safety of Distaval." So very unfortunate, that wording, and so untrue. But at the time, of course, there was no real mechanism for collecting the suspicions that the health professionals, the doctors and nurses had, that this drug was causing a problem. And the UK was one of the first countries in the world to enable health professionals, doctors specifically at the time, to submit their suspicions that there was a problem to a committee that were completely independent of the drug industry. And that's when we set up the yellow card scheme. It was that ability to submit suspicions to someone who would take their suspicions seriously and do something about it. The whole scheme started with senior medical staff reporting, but it has developed over the years, and as more and more health professionals have been encouraged to engage with the scheme and submit reports. And finally, in 2008, patients were allowed to report their suspicions to the scheme, and that has been a tremendous success, because who knows more about the effect of a medicine than the patient themselves. The yellow card scheme has created a database of these suspected adverse reactions, and there are now over 1 million reports that have been made to the scheme, which gives us a tremendous resource when we're looking to see whether or not a drug really does cause a reaction. Next slide, please. So the yellow card scheme, it's run currently by the Medicines and the Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the MHRA, who are a government agency, and they're also the regulator of medicines. So they are the agency who brings medicines to the market, make sure that they are safe and effective, but also who have a remit to really understand when things go wrong. The reports that come into the scheme are always of suspected side effects because it's really, really hard to be 100% sure that anything related to a medicine has definitely happened. And these reports are made in confidence by health professionals and patients and carers. And it's important to stress really that these reports are confidential. They're at no point in the future will anyone know that you as an individual has made that report. They will be aware of your report, but not that it's you that's made it. So this data can never be used in court cases, shall we say. So the whole scheme, it comes together and it acts as an early warning system to identify side effects and the risks of medicines. Next slide, please. It's really, really important because when a medicine comes to the market, we need to be able to be constantly monitoring it, and we don't know everything about a medicine before it's launched. So we have to have a scheme, a mechanism to pick up suspicions, and that's what the yellow card scheme is. Next slide, please, Nathan. So people often say, well, that's what we have clinical trials for, isn't it, to identify the side effects of medicines? Well, in fact, not all of the side effects that could be caused by a medicine will be picked up in a clinical trial. And you know, we usually trial drugs in between 1,000 and 3,000 people, and during that process we will pick up the very common side effects. So the side effects that are going to occur maybe in 1 in 10 people. So when we think about the vaccine that's just being used at the moment, anything like headaches or sore arms or things like that, very, very common. They will have been picked up, and they were picked up in the clinical trials. But the rarer side effects that happen far less frequently, and things like the toxic skin conditions, they won't be picked up in clinical trials. And it requires many patients to take the medicine before these will be picked up. And it's the yellow card scheme that helps us detect these more uncommon and rare side effects. Next slide, please. So why is it important to report? Well, it's about improving our understanding about the safety of the medicines that we use, and with the aim being obviously to prevent other patients or future patients to suffer. We need a mechanism to try and identify who is likely to suffer and be able to target them and not give them the medicines or use them in a different way. So as I said before, for new drugs, we know very little about them as they come to the market, you know, and we need to know more, and we need to know how often these reactions are going to occur. So for older drugs on the market, just because something's been around for many years or even many decades, it doesn't mean to say that we will always know everything, and we need to continuously collect information. We use drugs differently going forward. We're using drugs more and more as in the older patients as the population is getting older, and maybe that is a risk, and maybe there is something we can do about that risk. It's obviously clear we also use some medicines in a very different way, and as we change the use, we're going to change the side effect profile. Think about aspirin. Aspirin has been on the market for well over a century, but it came to the market for use as an analgesic at relatively high doses. We rarely use it in that way these days. We use it as an antiplatelet agent at a very low dose. So obviously the side effects we're going to see are going to be very different. And it's absolutely essential that we can pick up rare side effects. And this kind of scheme, the yellow card scheme, and what we call a spontaneous reporting scheme, is one of the very few mechanisms that we have to to detect very rare side effects. Next slide, please. So at the end of the day, this is all about the scheme, and the whole process is to balance the risks to the patient with the benefits of the treatment. It's an ongoing and continuous process, and that risk-benefit balance can change as things go forward, and we do re-evaluate how we use medicines, and sometimes we change doses, we change who we use the medicines in, and sometimes we even remove medicines from the market entirely. Next slide, please. So if you do suspect that you've had a reaction to a medicine, a side effect, when should you report that? Well, kind of the bottom lines here are, if your side effect is serious enough to interfere with your everyday activities, that is definitely something to consider reporting. And if your side effect is not already listed on the patient information leaflet that will come with your medicine, and yet you think that there's something going on that's related to the medicine, that is an indication that you really should report it if you can. Again, if you suspect that your side effects started after one or more medicines were added to your regular prescription, so what we're also looking to pick up is when medicines interact to cause problems. So if you're on a number of medicines and one more or two more are added in, and you suddenly get things that were reactions that were not there before, that's an indication that maybe you should report it on the yellow card. Next slide, please. So who can report? Who can report side effects that have happened? Well, you personally, if they happen to you, you can report. You can report for your child or for someone you are responsible for. It may be your spouse or partner, or another adult or child that you are responsible for. You can also report if someone asks you to make that report on their behalf. With regards to health professionals, every health professional, it doesn't matter what their profession, and can report. So doctors and pharmacists, nurses, obviously, but physiotherapists, opticians, chiropodists, dietitians, they can all report and are encouraged to do so if they identify as part of their job something that they believe is caused by a medicine when they're treating that patient. Next slide, please. Who do we consider to be most at risk of suffering from an adverse reaction or a side effect? Well, children and babies we know are at risk because sometimes the systems that they are born with are just not yet developed enough to manage drugs in the same way as they are in adults, so they are more susceptible. And right at the other end of the spectrum, older people are more susceptible to the risks of medicines. And sometimes it's because they're more susceptible to side effects, causing things like dizziness and affect the brain. And sometimes it's because their systems like their liver and their kidney that get rid of the drugs are not working so well. So that puts them at risk of problems. People who have more than one illness or disease tend to be more at risk of suffering reactions. Women, we know, do suffer more reactions than men, and we don't think it's just because women are more likely to report than men either. But we don't know the answer to why. People who suffer from allergies do also tend to suffer more from sensitivities to medicine. And also we do know that the more medicines that somebody takes, the more likely they are to suffer a reaction to at least one of those medicines that they take. Next slide, please. So how can you report? Well, there are 4 ways at the moment that you can make a report. You can go online and use the yellow card form at the web address that I've put on the slide there, or just Google yellow card MHRA and it'll come up with a link to the card. You can download the yellow card app either onto your smart device, either via the Apple Store or Google Play. You can pick up a paper yellow card form. You can sometimes find these in pharmacies and GP surgeries, although I'm not sure that you could reliably find one everywhere. Or if you really feel that you can't use a computer or an app and you haven't got a form, you can phone up the MHRA. They have got a dedicated line for patients who can make their report online, not online, via the telephone, and it might be easier for people, again, if their vision isn't great as well, to make that phone call and discuss it with somebody. Next slide, please. So this is just what the online system looks like when you get to it. So at the moment, if you go on, you'll be the very top there. It'll be asking you whether or not your report is to do with either the vaccine or something else to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. But the second button there says side effect on it, and that's where you would go to make your report. Registering is optional. If you get lots of reactions, you might want to register, but if it's a one-off, it isn't necessary. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, you can use the Yellow Card app. Again, you can use the app to make reports, but you can also look and see how many reports have been made for drugs that you're taking, or how many GI side effects, or how many skin side effects that you are that have been made for the different drugs that you might be taking or are interested in. And it'll also keep you up to date with any news or alerts related to the drugs that you are interested in. Next slide, please. And this is what the paper card looks like. So if you go and have a look at the leaflet rack in your GP or pharmacy, then this is the yellow card form, the patient form that you're looking for. Next slide, please. Okay, so what exactly do you need to report on your yellow card? Next slide, please. So there are very few details that you really need to make a report. You need to know, obviously, what needs to go on are details of your suspected side effect, what happened to you, and in as much detail as you want to put in. There is plenty of opportunity when you're completing a form to add free text descriptions of what happened to you. What's really important as well, of course, is the drug that you took, and it may be one drug, or maybe you're not sure which drug it was, and maybe you started on 2 drugs at the same time, and you don't know. It doesn't matter. Put both drugs in to the report. You'll always need to fill out some information about the person who has been affected. So if you're reporting on behalf of somebody else, somebody you're caring for, then their details will need to be put in. Their initials and their age are useful, but we certainly aren't interested in any names at all. And your contact details, just so that you can be contacted to say thank you, or maybe for a little bit further information. Next slide, please, Nathan. There are 5 sections on the yellow card form, and they're detailed there, but actually what I have got for you is a short kind of clip from YouTube that the MHRA put together to kind of walk you through how to complete a patient report. So I'm just going to ask Nathan now to show that little clip for me. By the way, there's no sound accompanying this, so you won't hear anything. It's just a visual representation, I hope.
Want to take your business online?
So that's
50,000 designs.
Back to the
Whether it's a birthday, anniversary, or just because. The perfect card.
Thank you. I think we're there. That's great. So just to the next slide then, please. Great. Thank you. So if you need any help completing your card, again, if you've got the card in front of you, get stuck, you can call the yellow card free phone number and ask a health professional, and they will be able to talk you through what to do. Thank you. So next slide, please. So what do we do with the information that you provide? Well, there's quite an extensive process that goes on behind the scenes, looking at everything that comes into the system. Computers obviously do a lot of the work, but people do look at anything unusual, and they look at the very serious reactions and decide how to take anything forward. There are a number of things that might happen. It might be that the patient leaflets are updated with new information about the side effects, or maybe it's the prescribing information that will be updated to guide the doctors or pharmacists when making a prescribing decision. We may want to restrict the indications on how the medicines is used, or maybe the dosage will have to be reduced. We might want to introduce new warnings for use, and rarely we will, if the risks do outweigh the benefits, withdraw a drug from the market. I think in the very, very recent past, I think the COVID vaccines that have come to the market have really highlighted, quite how quickly things can happen, and how internationally all of the agencies and all the people involved will collaborate to look at the reactions that are being reported. And also when we're thinking about weighing up the risks and the benefits and changing how we use things, think about the AstraZeneca vaccine when the thrombosis, the cerebral thrombosis events were being reported, and they looked at a variety of different, reasons that, weighing the risks and the benefits, and if there was anything that needed to be done. They came and decided that actually the risks for the younger population outweighed the benefits. So we don't use the AstraZeneca vaccine at the moment in anyone under 40, and that's because of that kind of ongoing risk-benefit assessment. And at any point in the future, for any medicine, we may make similar kinds of decisions. Next slide, please. So now I'm just going to bring for you just some kind of reporting data, just to highlight some little bits and pieces, some from locally, some from nationally. So next slide, please. So for the last kind of financial year, it is the whole year of data that we have between April 20 and March 21. Nationally, there were just over 40,000 suspected spontaneous reports made to the yellow card scheme, but that doesn't include the vaccines. So 40,000 yellow cards submitted, non-vaccines. And of those 40,000, 6,800 plus nearly 6,700 were made by patients or carers. So that's really quite a high percentage coming from patients and carers, which is absolutely brilliant, because patients do give us such a very different and potent perspective to the effects of medicines. Next slide, please. So I asked the MHRA if they could tease out those reports in that time period, that 1 year, for reports that were SJS or 10. And There were 70 reports in that year for those two conditions. As you can see, I've highlighted there carers, parents and patients made a total of 6 out of those 70 reports. But otherwise it's mainly hospital-based teams that are making the reports. So hospital doctors and hospital pharmacists who are flagging and making the yellow card reports into the system. And other health professionals, it's difficult to know who they are, but they are anybody who isn't a doctor, a nurse or a pharmacist. So it could be a physiotherapist, or maybe it's just somebody who is involved with caring very closely for patients, so healthcare assistants who've made those reports. Next slide, please. This is a very busy slide and difficult just to show, but this is those 70 reports. These are the drugs that were associated with them. Now I've ranked them by the number of occasions that they appeared in that year. So lamotrigine and allopurinol are the two medicines at the top of the list. And I think, you know, we do know that lamotrigine is one of the anticonvulsants that is often associated with very severe skin reactions, but there are all sorts, and as you will know, I'm sure you're all very expert patients, that almost every drug can cause a severe SGS or toxic bullous reaction, so quite a spread there. So next slide, please. So I'm from the northwest, and our region is kind of the Lancashire, Greater Manchester, Merseyside and Cheshire. And this is just to show you the reports that we get and who's making them in the northwest. So for the same year, 2021, we had just over 4,000 reports. So that's you know, that's 10% of what are made nationally. And as you can see in our region, or over half of the reports come from the pharmacy team, mainly in the hospital setting. About 20% of our reports come from patients or carers, and much smaller percentages from the doctors and the nurses. We're quite an unusual region because we do get an awful lot of pharmacy reports into the system. Next slide, please. I was able to get similar data for Scotland. I don't know if anyone on the call today is from Scotland. They have a very different ratio or percentage split in Scotland. As you can see, 40% of the reports in Scotland come from patients and patient groups, and a much smaller percentage from the pharmacy, which is about the same as the medical and the nursing staff. Next slide, please. Slightly different way of presenting it, but from Wales, and again, I'm not sure if anyone's from Wales, you can see that in Wales it is their general practitioners who make the largest contribution to the reporting. They have a different system of picking up adverse reactions in Wales, so the GPs are very hot there. But after the GPs, it is the patients that are making the next highest percentage of reporting in Wales. So as you can see, it's very, very different depending on which area of the country you're in. We don't really know the reason for that. Next slide, please. So this slide, and again, hopefully you can see it well enough. These are serious bullous reactions that have been made in the northwest region over the last 5 years. What I've tried to highlight there is kind of themes, and as Anita mentioned earlier, it is the anticonvulsant drugs, which I've highlighted in red, and the antibiotics, which I've highlighted in green, that are known to cause a lot of serious skin reactions. And that is very much borne out in our local northwest data. what you can also see is it varies from year to year what people will report and what they do report. There was an unfortunate or a bumper year, it depends how you're looking at it, in 17-18, where we got 12 reports of Stevens-Johnson syndrome from the Northwest. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm just going to finish with a couple of slides just on the vaccines, just to pick up. So this data is freely available in the weekly report that comes out from the MHRA. So if you ever want to go and look and see what's being reported for vaccines, they do make that available, and they do update it every week. So as you can see, so looking at the total there, this is the vaccine reports that have been made up until about 2 weeks ago in September. Just over 100,000 for the Pfizer vaccine, 220,000 for the Astra, 14,000, nearly 15,000 for the Moderna vaccine. So that's how many reports have been. Those numbers don't reflect that the adverse reaction profile is different, just that the number of vaccines that have been given is different, and very closely mirrors the volume of vaccines of each of those brands of vaccines that have been given. Next slide, please. But what I did tease out of the national data, looking at, again, what the MHRA have made available, is the serious skin reactions for each of the 3 vaccines. Again, as you will know, and as I've said, reactions that come in via the yellow card scheme are suspicions. So these reports reflect that somebody suspected that the vaccine had caused the problem, not that they definitely did. So never try and interpret it in that way. And you can see, can't you, that there have been a relatively small number of the SJS, so 4 for Pfizer, 7 for Astra. And again, because there's been twice as much Astra vaccine administered, then that pretty much mimics that as well. So I thought you might be interested in that. Next slide, please. And again, looking at the vaccines, now this is data from the Northwest. This is from December to March. I don't know the detail of what's reported in our region, but I do know who's reported it and for which vaccines. And it's interesting to see that actually patients and carers and the recipients of the vaccine have been by far and away the biggest group of reporters, as you would expect, because the majority of the reports that have come in have been the relatively relatively common reactions. So those reactions wouldn't necessarily have been presented to a health professional, but the patient can make a report. What's also interesting, and I hope you can see this, is that actually females have reported a lot more reactions than males, and that I don't know, and it's not clear whether that's because females have suffered more or because females have reported more. Could be either. And the age range, of where the reactions have come, quite high in the higher age groups, but again, otherwise pretty much evenly spread through the age range, which would imply that no particular age is any more susceptible or less susceptible to the reactions than another. Next slide, please. You'll be pleased to hear I've only got a couple more slides. So if social media is your thing, then the MHRA have a YouTube channel, and they've got lots of little short clips and bits and pieces on adverse reactions and what they do. They do have a Facebook account where you can follow things that they get up to via their Facebook account, and they do have a Twitter account, and so do we in the Northwest. So if you want to follow us, then please do. That's our handle. And finally, last slide, please. So if you do suspect that you have had a side effect, please, please, please do report. Your experience is invaluable, as only you know how that drug reaction made you feel. I've talked a lot about health professionals having made reports, but never assume that even if you've talked to them, your doctor or your pharmacist will report it. And there, as another reminder, is the website for the yellow card. So thank you. And if anyone's got any questions, please shout out.